Hello, we're going to use this cake here as a model for counting the layers of the Earth. And there's something I want to think about. Let's count the layers here. So if we counted the layers of cake, we could say there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 layers of cake here. But if we really wanted to count it differently, like what each layer tasted like or what it was made of maybe, and then we could count these little layers of icing in between here as an additional layer. So we could say there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 layers if we count that icing on the top. So depending on how we count the layers, this could be a cake with 12 layers or a cake with 6 layers, one or the other. Or we could really focus on like how it tastes or how it looks, and that might influence the number of layers that we have too. Let's say, I mean, if there weren't icing between these layers, maybe we could taste a difference between them, and maybe we couldn't, and it would taste like all one massive cake, even though it's different colors. That could influence how we count the layers too. So Earth has a similar conundrum here, though nobody is icing the Earth or tasting the Earth, but we count the layers in multiple ways, and I recommend you go ahead and kind of sketch something like this out on your guided notes. One way we count them is by composition, what the chemical composition is of each layer. And if we do that, we get kind of a 3-layer Earth. We get the outer crust, and it's either continental crust or oceanic crust, and it tends to be made of silica. And then this area in the middle here is a mantle, and this is more dense than the silica, so it sinks a little bit deeper. And then the center is a core made of iron and nickel. So this is all based on chemistry, what the composition is of the layers. This composition is iron and nickel. This composition is kind of a denser material somewhere between the silica, the lighter silica, and the iron and nickel. And then the outer layers tend to be a silica rock. Okay, so that's one way to count the Earth, 3 layers deep, if we're counting composition. However, there's another way to count it. We could count by the way the Earth behaves. So, like what the mechanical properties are of each of these layers. And if we do that, we get a 5-layer Earth. So let's start at the top. And the surface here we call the lithosphere, and litho just means rock. So this is the layer of rock sphere. Rock circle, kind of. And so this is what we walk around on. It's the rocky outer surface. On the compositional side, we call this the crust, the continental crust or the oceanic crust. Here we're just calling the whole thing the lithosphere because it tends to behave the same way, behaves like solid rock. Then we have this zone down here that is called the Asthenosphere, and this is like a plasticky zone. It's sort of behaves like silly putty, though a lot more viscous than silly putty. It's slower flowing than silly putty, but this layer we call the asthenosphere, and it's sort of at the top third of the mantle if you're looking at the composition. And then the bottom of the mantle we call the mesosphere, and the mechanical layer stuff, and so this tends to behave as a solid, more as a solid. And then the core gets divided, even though it's all, chemically it's all the same, it's iron and nickel, very dense. The outer core is liquid, and so this liquid outer core behaves differently than this solid, and the inner core is a solid core of iron and nickel. So 2 different ways to count the layers. If we're counting the chemistry, what it's composed of, the compositional layers, there are 3, crust, mantle, and core. If we count the way the rock behaves, the Earth behaves, then it behaves mechanically like a solid and then kind of a plastic and then a solid and a liquid and a solid. We call that the lithosphere, the asthenosphere, the mesosphere, the outer core, and the inner core. These depths here aren't that important, but you should have an understanding that this is all one Earth. It's just that we're counting the layers in a different way. Same as this being just one cake, and you could ask multiple people how to count it, and they could count 12 layers or 6, depending on what our definitions are. Okay, go be awesome.